Well, hello, and thank you for joining me for a joint production between Sophos and Cybermindz. My name is Alexander Zaharov-Royt, and I'm the techadvice.life editor. Now, I'd like to introduce you to two great men, John Donovan, who is a 30-plus year veteran of the IT industry, and who joined the Sophos team as Managing Director for Australia and New Zealand in April 2019, and Peter Coroneos, who among many career highlights was the Chief Executive of the Internet Industry Association of Australia from 1997 to 2011, is currently the Global Ambassador for CYAN, the Cybersecurity Advisors Network, and is the founder of Cybermindz, the world's first mental wellness program for cybersecurity professionals to prevent and address burnout and more. Welcome to you both.
Thank you. Hello.
Hi, Alex. Hi, John.
Thank you for taking the time. Now, John, let's start with you. Sophos has just launched the latest edition of its Future of Cybersecurity in Asia, Pacific and Japan report. And unlike previous editions, which examined cybersecurity issues that are confronting businesses throughout the Asia Pacific and the many and varied areas of focus that entails, this brand new February 2024 edition is different. So where can people download this report for themselves? And more importantly, how and why is this edition different?
Well, thanks, Alex, and thank you also for the opportunity, obviously, to talk with you again. It's been a while, and to reconnect with Peter. I think we've been working in each other's orbits for over 20 years now, so it's always a bit of a thrill to be able to work with him again. Yes, look, firstly, the report's available directly by download from sophos.com. It's in our white paper section, so pretty easy to find if you just go to sophos.com. And it was actually jointly researched by Sophos and also Tech Research Asia, TRA. And this is actually the fourth year that we've run this report. We spoke to just under, I think it was about 919, so just under 1,000 IT professionals from India, from Australia, Japan, Malaysia, Philippines, and Singapore. So really good, wide bunch of people that we spoke to across the industry. And as you mentioned previously, by design, the report kind of focused a bit on the technology and services. As we're dealing with the increased level of complexity and volume of attacks, there was a big focus on how best to counter them, whether it was through, technology responses, product responses, or service-based responses. But what's really emerged over this year is one component of the issues that companies have been dealing with, and that is the mental health aspect of all of this. And that, frankly, relentless level of security pressure we've seen through the developing complexity and volume and attack surface, it's really creating much more pronounced incidents of burnout in the industry. Interestingly, with this report, about 75%, I think, of the respondees had dedicated security teams. So they've already got security teams deployed. And about 5% of them, so about 1 in 20, actually outsourced the bulk of their security operations to external teams. But here's the really big key takeaway from the top level of the whole report. 86% of the respondees from Australia stated that their cybersecurity roles were significantly impacted by burnout and fatigue. So we've got a big issue here.
Well, that's definitely alarming news. I mean, it is the culmination of years of ever-increasing attacks across as many threat vectors as possible, now added by AI to boot. Yet, Peter, I mean, this is where we turn to you, because Cybermindz was conceived and created to effectively handle, if not actually for the first time, these very issues, which since Cybermindz founding in 2022 have only become ever more alarmingly urgent on a whole range of fronts. So can you please explain how Cybermindz works with these issues?
Yeah, thanks, Alex. Thanks, John, for doing this report, by the way. I think the more evidence that we can bring to the problem, I think the better. We live in a very data-driven world, and I think these statistics basically amplify and extend what we already understood to be the burgeoning problem within cybersecurity and related domains around IT as well. And I think they really vindicate our whole reason for being, which is precisely directed towards this problem, to come in and provide direct on-the-ground support for teams that are suffering in this way. And we actually talk about it in the language that we're here to alleviate the suffering of our professional peers. Bear in mind also that we are cybersecurity professionals ourselves, so we're taking very much a peer-informed approach to this work, because I think there is some real need and benefit actually when you can speak the language of cybersecurity. But to your point, Alex, so how we actually do it is we have a protocol that has been applied extensively in the military called the Integrated Restoration, or IREST protocol. And that's what we're bringing in. And it's specialized for teams that are in trauma, teams that are under this relentless sense of anxiety and stress and fear about what could happen. And we're able to actually restore them back into a sense of more equanimity and calm and feeling more on top of things. And I think that really is what's called for here. And I believe that actually know through the pilot work we did last year, we are actually able to deliver remarkably quick results in a relatively short period of time, quite profound shifts in the way that they perceive their work and also how they're responding to it.
So, John, you gave us sort of the big headline finding, but what are some of the other findings that viewers and listeners need to know about, and how this has changed the way that Sophos itself operates?
Yeah, once again, good insightful question there, Alex. You're getting right into the core of it. Look, we looked at what some of the major causes were of what's actually causing this feeling of burnout or being overwhelmed. And there were some interesting things that kind of bubbled up to the surface here from the people that we spoke to. The top causes, number one, and this is no surprise, was basically just the lack of resources to deal with the complexity and volume of the threat. Interestingly, the second one that popped up, and this, I've heard this, but we haven't heard it in such volume and consistency before, is this feeling of monotony if you work in a security team, of having to perform the same task day after day, reading the same reports, responding to similar alerts on a daily basis, really causes a feeling of malaise and monotony when that's all you're frankly doing. They're certainly dealing with increased levels of pressure from boards, if they're a large enough company to have a board, or from management, or both, if you're that sort of organization. And that's compounded by the fact that in many cases, the boards have very, very little understanding of the complexities of cybersecurity. Mm-hmm. And they certainly understand the potential impact on the business, but they don't necessarily understand the complexity of, architectural development, implementation, management, and response services related to that. They're feeling alert overload from a lot of the tools and the systems. Historically, and this was sometimes encouraged by the vendors, frankly, the solution to the complexity and volume of security threats and attacks was to buy more technology. Mm. Generate more data. Peter, you spoke about data being generated. We're data-driven in this industry. But all that does is tell you that there might be something going wrong. It doesn't actually fix it. So the more data that you generate, you either become immune to it, you let it kind of flow through because there's too much to deal with, or you just switch off from it, frankly. So that's causing issues as well. And then also, we're seeing an increase in the threat volume and complexity, as I spoke about before, as hackers develop and deploy new tools or utilize, AI systems to speed up and lift the level of complexity in attacks as well. Interestingly, almost half of the respondents felt that they weren't diligent enough in their roles to manage these sorts of attacks. 20% increased, or 20% of them reported increased levels of anxiety due to the threat of breaches. 29% felt cynical about their ability to actually do their jobs well. And this is the huge one. And this is a really big issue for our community. 22%, so almost a quarter of the respondees, and we had 200 respondees in Australia, said they either wanted to resign or change their jobs due to the stress and the anxiety that they're dealing with. So we've already got this globally, a huge shortfall in the number of trained professionals to help manage security systems. There's reports on how many open requisitions there are around the world. And frankly, it's just phenomenal. An exodus in our industry due to stress and anxiety and burnout will just compound this issue, and will either end up with poorly trained people in positions of power running security systems, or no one doing it, one of the two. So what are we doing about it? So at Sophos, we've invested heavily in our managed services around detection and response. We've been investing in this for over 5 years now. And that helps manage both the endpoint and the network layer. And we provide 24/7 global managed detection and response services to help alleviate some of these pressures. Interestingly, from our perspective, this is the fastest growing segment of the business that we've seen. And it's an issue that is not just an enterprise, because when you think about cybersecurity managed services, response remediation services, you automatically think about, big four banking or financial services or ASX 200, that sort of companies. The scale's all the way from SMB all the way up to enterprise. So it's a common challenge that's being dealt with by organizations across the spectrum.
I think that these results, John, very much, again, reflect what we're seeing independently when we ask the same kind of questions. And so, more and more, we're getting this consistent picture of what it is actually like to work on the ground in cybersecurity in 2024. And those observations around not feeling that they're diligent in their performance map back to a metric that we've uncovered in our national baseline study that we started about 18 months ago. And so we're measuring on a longitudinal basis a long-term decline in mental health within cybersecurity. And this particular metric, it's part of it's when we're measuring burnout, we use the gold standard. It's called the Maslach burnout inventory, and it's a 3-part metric which looks at cynicism and depersonalization.
Mm-hmm.
It looks at emotional depletion, and then the third one, which is the interesting one, is professional efficacy, the sense that I'm doing well in my job.
Mm.
And of those three, that last one, the sense of self-efficacy, we are polling worse than frontline healthcare workers on that burnout metric. And of the 3 burnout metrics, that's the one that predicts resignation intent. So basically, when you put all that together, what our research is showing, which I think your research seems to be, reiterating here, is that to the extent that you feel that you're not winning, and remembering that these roles, it's very hard to demonstrate success. So you begin to question your own efficacy. Also, you're not able to demonstrate to anybody else that matters that you're being successful and effective. And so you start to doubt why it is that you're even in the role. And that is really the entryway into the exit, as it were, to mix my metaphors. It's you're signaling that you're on the way out. When you get to that point where you feel like I'm not good at what I do, or maybe I'm faking it, or people think I'm better than what I am, or, the self-doubt is really quite insidious. And then, there is no, in the normal scheme of things, there's no counterpoint to that. There's no big sort of signal that comes in to demonstrate that isn't true, except a breach, of course, where, then you have a single failure, all bets are off, and you're ending up with not just self-doubt, but also you have trauma overlaid on top of that, the anxiety and the fear that we talk about. And I think that's what we're seeing. And your point about the skill shortage is exactly why Cybermindz, as a not-for-profit, what we're doing what we're doing because we see where this is all heading. If there isn't an actual intervention at the human level, then we are going to lose people, and they're the people that we can least afford to lose, the ones with the experience. So, it's pretty serious. But I guess hearing about your managed services and the technological answer to that is really important, because I think in the end, the way that we're going to address this whole question is through a combination of both technological support, but also importantly, the direct human support, which is our part of the equation. It's a very good combination. If it's employed strategically and properly budgeted for and resourced, I really do believe that we can turn this thing around. And that's why we're as committed as we are, because we really see, even with the results that we've shown already in the last 12 months, that we can actually change this, and get them back into this sense that they are actually, even if they're not winning externally, they're winning internally.
Yeah, and Peter, I'll jump in and just support everything you've said. I've been in front of hundreds and hundreds of customers over my years in the industry, And I don't think I've ever seen it as pronounced that it is now when you walk into an organization and talk to them about, cybersecurity and resilience and all that sort of stuff. And one of the first questions I asked is, can you introduce me to your cybersecurity team? And they'll, many occasions be in the boardroom with us, talking about it. And, this is Kevin in the corner, and he's our cybersecurity expert working with, Ben and Patricia or whatever. Okay, great. Okay, so you guys dedicated to security. Oh, well, we also do network management and we do applications management. We're responsible for the physical hardware. We manage the cloud connections, all that sort of stuff. And you can see that they're overloaded already. And that's before a breach happens. And we've seen what happens over the last few years. There's been some incredibly high profile breaches in the Australian marketplace and globally significantly worse. But what happens is it's a pile-on. It's a huge pile-on. So, the media will go after the CEO. The CEO will have to explain to the board. The CEO goes to the CISO. The CISO goes to the IT manager. The IT manager goes to the team. And all they want to know is, what happened? Who can we blame? How do we recover? How do we prevent it? And it's just basically the most stressful environment you could be in. And you can see that they're under-resourced and not well managed from the very beginning. It's a ticking time bomb, to use a terrible phrase to describe it, but it worries the pants off me that it's still viewed as being a technical response, and there's very little done in terms of good planning and how to actually respond to these sorts of threats and the mental well-being of the teams. Not just when there's a breach, but preparing for it. How do you care for them when it happens? And most importantly, Peter, as you pointed out, how do you resolve the trauma that occurs afterwards when in some cases, your company will be front page news because of a security breach and you're the security person? This is traumatic.
Definitely. And I think every time the news reports on it, they feel re-traumatized. And so, when a story's running for weeks, like we saw with some of those major breaches at the end of 2022, those teams feel it. I mean, they're having nightmares over this, and you can't leave them. The other thing, John, Alex, is trauma often doesn't self-resolve. Like, they say time heals all wounds. That may be true in a physical sense, but often with this deep psychological trauma, and that's why the military stuff, the use case with the IRS protocol in the military was so stunning for me. It was, it was impactful because I thought, if we are able to recover people from war zones that have endured some of the worst trauma imaginable that a human might encounter, then surely we've got a tool that we can use for psychological trauma in cyber teams, where at least, your physical being is not under attack. But the actual way that the brain apprehends stress and fear and trauma is indistinguishable. And that's one of the other things I think is, in a way, more pernicious about cybersecurity, is that you can't see the enemy. You can't see who's coming at you. And so all the natural instinctive reaction around, and we talk a little bit about neuroscience when we do our training. We teach them about the flight and fight response and what's actually going on there, but without going too much into it. Now we're carrying an ancient evolutionary threat detection and response apparatus that was optimized for physical threats. And we've carried that, within the mammalian line for over 200 million years. And suddenly we're transposing that into a virtual threat environment, and there is no off switch. There's no signal to show that the threat is de-escalated and everything can return to equilibrium. And that, combined with the deep, traumatic stuff that won't self-resolve, is why you need a really good hack, a really good antidote to come in that actually can reset and recalibrate the internal sort of psychological apparatus so that you can get people well again. And that's clearly what's called for here. And we talk to the post-breach teams, but I think your point about prevention is so important, that the real, where they say the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The next best time to plant a tree is today. It's the same with this kind of thing. I mean, if you're not preparing your team psychologically for a breach, then you're actually leaving it to chance as to how and when and to what degree they they succumb to trauma when a breach actually occurs. And so we think there's actually a duty of care in these very high-risk occupations, as the cyber defenders are probably characterized. You've got to go in there and give them the mental resilience before, and that way they're more likely, firstly, to avoid a breach because they're in a better part of their brain, when they're on the job. And secondly, if they do encounter a breach or, some sort of hack kind of situation, they're more likely to be able to just center themselves and get through it in a way that they're not going to become the casualty of the hack along with the organization. I mean, I'm trying to communicate here a very positive message. I mean, it's very easy in these kind of discussions to scare people because we all know how bad things are getting. And I think really our message, yours and mine today, John, is about let's be realistic about the risks, but also let's be optimistic and positive that there are actually things that we can do now to make things better.
Agreed.
So, Peter, can you please explain more about the results that people have had experiencing Cybermindz? I mean, you've already given a sort of a taste into that, but the difference this has made into their lives. I mean, I heard you before talking about effectively the imposter syndrome, and I heard the stats at the original 2022 launch about how before the pandemic, people were already suffering burnout and living their roles after less than a couple of years. And clearly you've got the issue where you also touched on it, where the next generation coming through needs the mentoring by the older and wiser generation that is just leaving the industry, and all that corporate knowledge is going. And this also dovetails into the fact that over the last couple of weeks, as we're recording, you've launched a new rapid reset program to help those affected by burnout, to create a steady shield of resilience around each person, and your new CISO support solution, which has been specifically tailored for chief information security officers and cyber leaders confronting the daily risk of burnout. So just, tell us more about the programs and how you're really making a difference, and people are reporting to you that they've really felt it.
Yeah, last year was a really special year for us. We were bringing the protocol in for the first time in the world into cybersecurity. And so we were pretty confident because we had 20 years of application in the military that we were going to get a good result. But luckily, we've got the capacity. We've got Dr. Andrew Reeves on our board, who's not only a cybersecurity expert in his own right, but he's also a qualified organizational and behavioral psychologist. So I said to Andrew, look, we want to measure as we go here so that we can actually provide the metrics back to the organization. So we do pre-post testing so that we can see where they're coming in and where they're exiting. And we found really good results across the 12 pilot groups. So we trained 180 cyber professionals last year in about 10 organizations. And they were across national security, defense, into the private sector and the education sector. So we had a very good spread, and the roles ranged from the CISO all the way down through forensics, GRC, security engineers, basically the whole spread. Gender-wise, it broke down to about 80-20, which is roughly what we see in the industry anyway. So we feel that we got a fairly good capture on a representative sample. Over the 8 weeks with the pilot programs, it was 1 hour a week, plus they get the recordings of the protocol that they're meant to use in between sessions. So the aim is to actually really do a full reset on the internal psychological processes that would be overactive and problematic. And we found that across that entire cohort, an average reduction across 10 stress metrics, try saying that fast, 10 stress metrics of 27% improvement in 8 weeks, which we thought was pretty phenomenal. We saw a 30% reduction in a feeling of things being beyond their capacity to manage. And importantly, a 50% reduction in the sense of being no longer on top of things. So these are pretty powerful numbers. I mean, they're actually showing a consistent improvement across the range of malaise that we see within the sector, which we're hearing anecdotally. Now we're able to measure it. So on the basis of that, over the Christmas period, we went back and we did a deep dive into our own statistics, and we was trying to tease out the areas where we could provide more targeted offerings beyond the pilots. And so we came up with actually 4 new offerings that we launched a week ago. One's Rapid Reset that you mentioned, which is a condensed 4-week bi-weekly sessions of the protocol. And the aim there is that we're looking at teams that are actually in trauma or have recently experienced trauma. And with the aim of the protocol, and we can measure this as well, is to actually get them out of trauma and get them back into a sense of well-being. And frankly, I think the sooner you do that post-trauma, or more importantly, more that you can do it preventively pre-trauma, then the less the trauma is going to persist. So that's Rapid Reset. The second program is called Steady Shields, where we've turned it around and we're looking at what would a sustainability program look like over 12 months. And here we're looking at building this into the workplace so that it becomes a standard feature of the working week, where they get the support, they get mentoring, they get the group sort of dynamic. And also we do the weekly drop-in sessions where they come in anytime, in their own time outside of the working, or even we could build it into the work week. They get this ongoing feeling that they're part of something that is supporting them. And over time, you see that the deep neurological change takes time. We start to see results over 8 weeks, even within MRI scans. The studies are showing that the brain can actually restructure even in a relatively short period of time. But we really think the holy grail here, the real end game, is long-term sustainable mental health. And then the third thing we've offered is this CISO support program, which is one-on-one mentoring for the leadership, whether it's the CISO or the CIO or, you know, whoever it is that feels they're carrying the can for a lot of this. This is designed as a one-on-one, almost like a coaching thing, where we have a highly qualified mental health coach that is trained. And we use the IRES Dyad program, which is different from the group program. It's more tailored towards the individual's needs in that moment, what they need and how we can support them. And then finally, we launched Basecamp, which is more of a self-paced, more of the preliminary, as you imagine the metaphor of we're about to climb a mountain, well, we have to do the preparation. So Basecamp is a dive into the neuroscience and the theory of IRES, how it works, so that we get everyone ready, prepared, so that they get more out of the programs. So those are the 4 things that we've launched, and we're really excited that we're going to be implementing those effectively from February now onwards.
Peter, I'm just going to jump in and say that is fantastic. The programs and services and support services you're explaining or talking through there are exactly what our research is indicating is a critical need in the industry. So you're really on point in what we're hearing from our customers.
Well, yeah, thanks, John. That's really important feedback. I mean, I guess we're trying to really communicate here that we are listening to the market, to our peers, and I know you are too, because I mean we all work in cybersecurity, and I think, you know, the message we're trying to convey is that we've really thought very deeply about what we're offering and how that we can optimize that so that we deliver the quickest and best results that we can. And I think it's just an opportunity here that we are pioneering in this space. No one is doing this kind of work anywhere in the world. And I think I'm so proud that we've just got such a great team of facilitators, and we've got Dr. Richard Miller himself as the pioneer of the IRES protocol, as a clinical psychologist that originally took the work into the military in the US. And he's actually the chair of our Global Advisory Council. So we're working directly with the inventor of this powerful protocol. And I mean, we just feel so blessed that we've got the best people behind us on this, and we've got such powerful advocates that are behind us as well. And I think, you know, the work lies ahead of us, but we get up every morning and we're just loving it, because, you know, a big part of the protocol is reconnecting people with their own mission and purpose. And for us, I think that's the game changer for us. This is our mission and purpose. And I think the thing we find with mission and purpose is the more that you are aligned with it, the more that you're able to perform, you know, at your peak. And that applies to us, it applies to our clients, it applies to our partners, it applies to everybody.
So, John, you're obviously putting out this report not only to raise awareness, but to go well beyond that, to actually advise companies and to help them put these kinds of strategies into place. And, you know, given the reality of burnout well before your attendance at the original launch in Sydney, Australia, in mid-2022 of Cybermindz, tackling this in a smart, intelligent, caring, people-centric and results-driven manner is clearly vitally important. Now, the report has been out since last week as we are recording. So what has been the feedback from everyone in the industry so far?
Yeah, thanks, Alex. Look, I think what we're doing here is we're saying the quiet part out loud. I think people have feared that what we're dealing with here today has been the case for a while, but no one's really, with the exception of Peter and some other organizations, really put it into words and tried to have a little bit of empathy for the teams that are out there. We've known for quite a while that there's a significant issue with mental health and burnout in IT, and at a much higher level in the cybersecurity space. It's natural when you're under that level of 24/7 stress. I talked before about going into meetings with customers where they have 2 or 3 people in the room that are managing everything, and yet they're supposed to be managing 24/7 cybersecurity risk management, resilience, response services, all of that sort of stuff. Sometimes they've got a dedicated team, but even if you've got a dedicated team, this is a challenging environment to work in. Peter's been talking about doing something in this space for a couple of years now, and it's only gotten worse since the time that they launched. If we can continue to message the importance of mental health as a component of a good cybersecurity resilience solution, then that's a good outcome. Technology, services, mental health support. I think 3 legs of an important stool here. But it's a lot more far-reaching, I think, than just providing the support for the teams. The security professionals are really challenged by boards and senior management that really just don't understand cybersecurity prevention and risk management. They think it's something to respond to. Are we protected? Can we respond well? That's it. And yet when something happens that's outside of that, they scream, do something, do something. And then, the stress levels go through the roof. I think, boards, senior managers and employees, continue to make basic cybersecurity mistakes on a regular basis. It's just human nature. And yet it falls just to the security teams to manage this. If you think about the complexity of a mid-range organization with all the different customer-facing or supply line connections, the risk of something going wrong at some point is hugely pronounced in this 24/7 constant connection. And I think from our research, there's a very low level of confidence from security teams on what the response plans even look like. And this is I found this a really concerning piece of response. 41% of the responders, don't forget, 919 responders across the whole of Asia Pacific and Japan, 41% of the responders felt that there was little point in trying to protect company data because a breach was ultimately inevitable. That is huge. So even the dedicated cybersecurity teams are saying, it's going to happen. We think it's going to happen anyway. So, and imagine going to work, Peter, you mentioned this before, going to work, feeling that level of stress and anxiety, and then, almost half the respondents thinking that it's going to get through anyway, and I'm toast. And you can understand why we're dealing with these burnout levels that we are. We've got a job to do to help manage the risk, to help develop better resilience and build trust and confidence, and partnering with organizations like Cybermindz. I think we can really address that mental health side of the equation as well.
Yeah, no, there's nothing I could add to that. I just think that you've covered, well, except I don't know. The question of depersonalization and cynicism is the other aspect of burnout. So I said there are 3. The professional efficacy that we've discussed. The one you just mentioned then would go to cynicism, depersonalization, in that sense that nothing I do will make any difference to the outcome anyway. And so you get cynical, and that's where they start to switch off. They're there, but they're not there, quiet quitting type thing, which is a lack of engagement. I mean, it's been a perennial issue within human resources management forever, this engagement question. They're always giving them engagement questionnaires. But I think with cybersecurity, I think it's particularly poignant because the truth is that they are making a difference. They are making it. I mean, if they stopped doing it, we'd be in a far worse position than we are now. And this idea that we're going to get hacked anyway, so what's the point, misses the point that when you saw with Medibank and with Optus, the pain that is experienced at a societal level. And it wasn't even the failure of cyber teams there. I mean, they get the blame, but really it wasn't. They're there to sort of try and sort out the mess. You know, without these dedicated, unsung heroes doing this work, we're toast. I mean, there's no going back. John, you remember when we were doing the Internet Industry Association, you were one of our early members when you were there with another company, but we were struggling to get everyone online. We were saying, come online, you know, this is the revolution. And now everyone's online, and suddenly it's like we're vulnerable from every direction. Now with IoT and OT on top of that, and it's like every single connected device is a potential, you know, vector.
Well, everybody demands everything to be connected everywhere in the world all the time, because that level of communications and enablement is how people expect us to work these days. But with that comes the intrinsic security risk, which is, threat management, privacy concerns, all of the other stuff as well. So working out the balance between the two. Peter, I think, and Alex, I think one of the biggest challenges we have is we know the level of risk, we know the level of anxiety and stress and burnout. We should be approaching these sorts of breaches in a very, very different manner and providing support and educational services both pre, during, and after, rather than automatically assuming that we can blame someone and fire someone for this.
Yeah, I agree. And the other thing I was going to say is when we are trying to position our work, we really don't want it to be seen as yet another form of training. I mean, training has its place, but we see that this really is more properly understood within the frame of organizational resilience. That if your defenders are breaking, that is potentially an existential risk for the organization. And so that's why we need them to reevaluate budgeting for the support of this, so that this is not just put in the pigeonhole of wellness or put in the pigeonhole of, staff skills development. This is fairly and squarely within the domain of a safer organization, a more secure customer base, lower regulatory risk, lower media exposure and brand damage risk. That's how the mental health of cybersecurity professionals needs to be understood in those terms. And only then, I think, will we really get the degree of buy-in that will move the needle on this problem. We're moving the needle, but I think the more that we can start to get a meeting of minds around the common challenge, then I think the way forward becomes smoother.
Well, before we end, do we have any final words from you, John, and from you, Peter?
Thanks, Alex. Yeah, look, final thing from me would be, to anybody that's watching this, download the report, have a look, and then just ask yourself, does this sound like my organization? And if so, how can I better manage this risk? And most importantly, how do I support my staff?
Peter?
I think for me, I'd like to leave you all with a message of hope, to say that we do see you and we honor you. You are our peers, our colleagues, our friends. We've known you for a long time and we've seen this thing developing. And it's time now that we've got to act collectively as a community to support each other, even if we're not getting the external support that we think we need. Let's support each other and let's see what we can do to rebuild this industry from the inside out. And that starts from each individual, from the inside out. And that way we become strong again together.
Well, thank you very much for your time. I do appreciate you both. It's very insightful and eye-opening. And I'm glad, certainly, that something actually is being done about it, both from the industry and from an organization, non-profit like Cybermindz. There will be a joint production between Sophos and Cybermindz later this year with CISO support events. So please stay tuned for that. And I thank you both once again, and goodbye to everyone for now.